Rishi Sunak has travelled to Israel to express the UK's solidarity with the people there in their war against Hamas. What does that mean for the UK? What does that mean for the brewing conflict in the region? Let's talk now to Colonel Richard Kemp, who's a former British Army commander. Hi, Richard. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thanks.
I mean, is this an escalation in essence now? You've got Joe Biden already travelling to the Middle East, to Israel, expressing his support, of course, the US, a long-term ally and protector of Israel. And now our Prime Minister has gone out with James Cleverly set to follow tomorrow, I believe, to go for meetings in Saudi Arabia and Egypt. How important is it that we as a nation get involved?
It's extremely important that we do, and I was very pleased to see Rishi Sunak's statement that he made with the Prime Minister of Israel, in which I believe he delivered the strongest message of support that any British Prime Minister has ever delivered to Israel. And it's so important now with Israel in such an extremely tough situation, attacking Hamas from the air in Gaza, troops on the ground preparing to deploy on a ground offensive if they're ordered in. And I've met many of those troops in the last few days who are ready to go. They're absolutely determined and resolute in their intention to go in and protect their own civilian population. And then, of course, up in the north, Israel faces a threat from both Lebanon, Hezbollah in Lebanon, who have been intensifying their attacks against Israel in the last few days, and also from Syria, where Iran, whose hand is behind this whole thing, has been pushing its proxy militias forward towards the Israeli border. So a very tough situation for Israel following a absolutely nightmare massacre the weekend before last. And Israel deserves all of our support. And particularly, I think the Prime Minister has delivered that strong message to show it.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Iran there, because it hasn't escaped my attention that it's been said for a long time that Iran has a particular connection with Hamas. So they indeed, the Revolutionary Guard there, may have been behind both choreographing and instigating the atrocities we saw committed by Hamas in Israel. Some of the pictures and the footage that we have seen with the music festivals, the babies slaughtered in their beds, potentially the work of Iran in order, I would imagine, to try and get the West to react, to try and get Israel to react. And then, of course, we've had this bombardment of the hospital in Gaza very quickly, a cyber information campaign pinning the blame of that on Israel. How much do you think that Tehran is sitting there fanning the flames, and why? Why are they doing it now?
Yeah, Iran funds, arms, trains and directs Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza, the two major terrorist organizations. The same applies to Hezbollah in Lebanon. Iran is undoubtedly behind this. And you're absolutely right when you say that what Iran wants is a reaction from Israel. This is their strategy in relation to the Gaza Strip, is to force Israel into a position where it has to carry out military operations against terrorists there, knowing, of course, that because the terrorists hide behind the civilian population, civilians are going to die. And that's their major weapon, is mustering world opinion and rallying world opinion against Israel, to vilify Israel and to delegitimize Israel, because by accusing them of slaughter of innocent civilians. And in terms of the reason why now for this particular operation, I think it relates closely to the fact that Israel was on the verge of a historic normalization of relations with Saudi Arabia, and that was getting closer. And that worries Iran enormously, because the last thing Iran wants is any kind of open relations between Israel and Saudi. And you mentioned also the hospital attack. I think many people in the media, on social media, and in some politicians as well, were absolutely irresponsible in immediately condemning Israel and saying Israel was responsible for that. It turns out, after Israel had done the relevant checks, that Israel was not responsible for that. It was, in fact, Islamic Jihad who carried out that attack. Now, the reason I say it's so irresponsible is because it incites violence. We've already seen increased violence around the Middle East and in the West Bank here in Israel. We've already seen the world, almost the world, turning on Israel because of something that they did not do. And you know, the media, I believe, in particular, has a duty to hold back on their attacks before they know, before they know exactly what's happened. Then fine, if Israel turned out to have done it, by all means condemn Israel for doing that, but not without any knowledge. Unfortunately, it's far too common a pattern from so much of Western media.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. It seems to me that the media are going along with Iran's playbook, who want to fuel a greater conflagration in the region. What I wonder, though, is we've had discussions about Iran for a long time now. Of course, the JCPOA, the nuclear deal with Iran, saying, look, if you stop proliferating uranium, we will lift some of the trade sanctions against you. The EU have been pushing, of course, for that to be back on the table. I mean, Germany is, I think, the biggest exporter to Iran, largely materials such as mechanic goods and chemicals. 35% of Iran's imports come from Germany, which makes me wonder what sort of capabilities Iran themselves have. And if Israel does go into Gaza, we've seen the threats that they're going to go in and try and flush out Hamas and rescue some of those hostages for almost a week now, and nothing has happened. If they did go in, and this is following Iran's playbook, with the threats from Iran, you set one foot inside Gaza and we're going to come after you. Does Tehran have something quite frightening up its sleeve?
Well, Iran does not have nuclear weapons at the moment available to it. People say if they did get those nuclear weapons, then, of course, they wouldn't use it any more than the US or Russia or Britain did during the Cold War. But I don't think you can apply anything like that template to Iran. They're not rational thinkers, or at least they're rational thinkers, but not in the way we think. So that would be a real danger. And it's been hugely irresponsible of the US and European countries to look to this nuclear deal and to appease Iran to try and get it. Because the fact is, whatever Iran says or signs or doesn't sign, it's not worth the paper it's written on. Iran is a very dangerous country. And Iran has threatened, as you say, Israel to go to attack if Israeli forces go into Gaza. Well, Iran's primary means of attack is 150,000 rockets in southern Lebanon pointed the length and breadth of Israel. And I think if Israel does go in, that will be potentially unleashed, that threat. And Israel will then be facing a war on 2, possibly 3 fronts, if you include Syria, which is going to be an enormous undertaking for Israel.
Right.
And I think Israel is going to, certainly, if they've got a large amount of ground forces committed in Gaza and they're facing a war on the northern front as well, that will be a massive challenge. They prepared for it and they're trained for it, but it's nevertheless going to be very, very tough. And again, that's another reason why we all need to stand behind Israel against this threat from Iran, which is not just a threat from Israel, it's a threat for the whole of the civilized world. And don't forget, Iran and Russia are closely aligned. And I would not be at all surprised if Russia didn't have a hand in this whole thing as well. No,
I have no doubt. I mean, we've seen military operations and joint naval exercises between Russia, Iran and, of course, China, in some cases looping in South Africa as well. And it's extremely concerning. And I think what you say is echoing, indeed, what the Israeli Prime Minister has said, saying the conflict with Hamas is a battle of the entire civilized world. You have essentially the anti-Western axis who could all come together. And this, what started off as horrific atrocities committed by Hamas in Israel has the potential to fan out into something much bigger and far more catastrophic, which leads me on to my next question, where Rishi Sunak says, I'm proud to stand here with you in Israel's darkest hour as your friend. We'll stand with you in solidarity. We will stand with your people. We also want you to win. What does winning look like in this game of 3D chess? If they can't get into Gaza to rescue hostages without potentially this exploding into 150,000 missiles aimed at their country, spreading out across the region, a huge ideological battle which could fan out across the world, both in domestic protests and acts of terrorism and also within the Middle East. What does winning look like? Where does Israel and where does the West go from here?
Well, in terms of Gaza, Israel has, the chief of staff of the IDF a few days ago set out essentially his military objective, which is to create a situation where no armed terrorist groups will exist inside Gaza. Now, there are many armed terrorist groups, predominantly Hamas and Islamic Jihad. And so what it means is destroying them. And that means killing as many of those terrorists as possible. Now, it may not be possible to kill them all, and it's even if troops go in on the ground, they may not be able to get all of them. But as a kind of a secondary way of dealing with them, apart from killing them, and no one likes to hear people talking, we must kill everybody. No one likes to hear that. But unfortunately, there is no choice in this situation other than to get rid of these terrorists. When you just look at what they did 2 weekends ago and what they want to do in the future, they're interested in a genocide. They're interested in annihilating Israel. That's their purpose. So it has to be eradicated. But as a secondary way of getting rid of them, apart from killing them, is to get them out of Gaza. And that is a possibility. And I've no doubt that the Israelis and other countries are looking at how you do that. In other words, get them to leave, get some of the survivors to leave Gaza through Egypt to where, I don't know, and how, I don't know. But that's obviously a desirable option as well. And the other question that I think people need to be thinking about now is what happens once Hamas has gone, because Hamas governs Gaza. There's a large population in Gaza that will be emerging from a devastating war against Hamas, not against them, but they are, of course, many of them, all of them probably are suffering. Who governs Gaza then? It's not going to be the UN. It's not going to be the Palestinian Authority. It certainly isn't going to be Egypt. I think that really leaves pretty much Israel. And I would imagine that no one knows how this is all going to shape out, but I would imagine that will leave Israel, the IDF, inside Gaza for quite a considerable time to come.
I mean, let's go back to this idea of Israel going into Gaza, trying to get rid of these terrorists, flushing Hamas out, while also trying to release as many of the hostages as possible, not just Israelis being held hostage, of course, foreign nationals who were in Israel at the time who have been targeted and picked up and captured and potentially killed, tortured by Hamas. I mean, Hamas operates very carefully and cleverly with a network of underground tunnels. They use civilian structures, they use schools, they use hospitals deliberately as human shields in order to make it very difficult for Israel to go after them, and also make Israel look very much like the bad guy if one stray missile happens to go somewhere and takes out certain civilians, something that Israel has repeated it does not want to do. So how on earth are they going to do this?
Are you asking how they're going to get the hostages out?
Yeah, how do they target Hamas? How do they release the hostages when Hamas uses human shields and hides underground in tunnels? Yeah,
well, Hamas want them. It sounds bizarre, but it is true. Hamas want the IDF to kill their own civilian population for the reasons I discussed earlier on about vilifying and getting Israel condemned around the world. So that's one thing that they want. And it therefore makes it impossible, whether from the air or the ground, it is impossible that Israel can get to those Hamas terrorists without killing innocent civilians. They don't do so deliberately. They do their best to avoid it. But it is not possible. If anyone can tell me a way that Hamas can be dealt with without killing any civilians at all, or even a very small number, I would love to hear it, because nobody has suggested anything so far. It's a bad reality, and it's a reality we faced in operations in Afghanistan and Iraq with the same tactics of human shields being used, and even in places like Northern Ireland on a rather different scale. But as far as the hostages are concerned, that is one of Israel's top priorities, to rescue those 199 people who are being held by Hamas inside Gaza now. Of course, they will use them as human shields also, but they will know that Israel is working hard to try and get some of them, hopefully all of them, but it's a tough task. They're distributed around Gaza. I don't know how many different places, but they're not going to be in one place. And they're going to have guns to their heads, so that if there's any indication that an IDF rescue operation is about to take place, the first move of the terrorists will be to kill them. Now, that doesn't mean to say they're going to succeed. Israel is very competent and has got a phenomenal track record at hostage rescue over many years. But it makes it an incredibly difficult thing and a very, very dangerous situation for all those poor people who were dragged from their homes, dragged from their beds, dragged from the streets, and hauled into Gaza, and where they remain. I was in Tel Aviv earlier today and walked down a street where there's 199 people standing there with placards. Each placard has the face of one of the hostages: men, women, babies, children, old people, including, I believe, one Holocaust survivor. And so this is a massive priority for Israel, but it's also probably the single most difficult mission that they they've got to achieve today, and probably the single most difficult mission they've ever been asked to do.